dawn breaks over Lahore and the morning sun hits the Badshahi Mosque, turning into a line of fire. Built in 1673 under Aurangzeb, this mosque will remain the biggest mosque in the world for several centuries. But Mughal presence in Pakistan is not just about a building, it's also about art, culture, aesthetic, and everything which was there in India. Uh, in our last 6 episodes, we have spoken about mostly Delhi and Agra and part of what we know as current India. But we have not spoken about Lahore and parts of Pakistan where Mughal legacies are still alive. So this is Art India with Dr. Alka Pande and Nidheesh. And we are going to talk about, in this bonus episode, about uh, 500 years of Mughals in what we know now as Pakistan. Welcome, Dr. Pandey. Thank you so much for being here. And how do you see? I mean, because it's always, in all the Urdu parlance and everywhere earlier before partition, it was always seen as Lahore versus Delhi. There was always a kind of a competition between them in terms of the culture and the aesthete. And Lahore had as much of legacy as we know, with the fort and the mosque and Anarkali Bazaar and the rest of the stuff.
So, my friend Pran Navil had written a book called Lahore. And he was a man who was extraordinarily linked to Lahore. And then the other thing, jinne Lahore ni vekhya, wo jamya hi nahi. So, a lot of Punjabis of that generation who were part of pre-partition India had a very, very close and very intimate relationship with Lahore. And as you said, the Anarkali Bazaar, the culture of the Marasis, which is common to both East and West Punjab, the culture of music, Sufism, and the Punjabi folk, it was very, very common. But forget the commonalities. What the Mughals did, for them, Lahore was also their capital. For Jahangir and Akbar, to a large extent, it was only Shah Jahan who made the new city of Shah Jahanabad and made Delhi his capital. Lahore was almost like 3 points of a pyramid: Delhi, Agra, and Lahore. These were 3 very important cities for the Mughals. Particularly for Jahangir, he loved Lahore. He and his wife passed through it many times because they loved going to Shalimar Bagh in Kashmir, today's present day Jammu Kashmir. In fact, I think they went 13 times in their life, and they went through the snowy mountains of the Pir Panjal, and often they crossed Lahore. And as you know, Jahangir is even buried in Lahore. So Lahore has a very, very special place in the culture, the heritage, the politics of the Mughal Empire, because it was an undivided India, because now we talk of Pakistan in India. Earlier it was the Hind. It was part of this great empire called Hindustan. And Lahore was very much part of what we call the South Asian subcontinent. This is, of course, only since 1947, after partition, that Lahore becomes a different entity. But as you know, Lahore was also known as the Paris of the East, because as far as culture went, as far as the colleges, the schools, which were later part of modernity, I'm not talking of the Mughals at that time, but Lahore had an enduring and a continuous tradition of art and culture, which of course the greatest seeds were laid by the Mughals.
I mean, it's also like same, but different in terms of when we see, all the Harappan civilization and the rest. I mean, Ranjit Singh had his capital there. So clearly, Lahore remain important. And when we see pre-partition India, it has all the not just political but also as you're talking about art, culture, aesthetic, poetry, uh, language, and so what was happening in the Mughal the Mughals when they were ruling there?
Well, they were doing the same things what they were doing in India. They were making beautiful buildings. Architecturally, Lahore is very rich. They were building elegant gardens. They were having riverfront culture. They were having literary gatherings and a very, very sophisticated courtly life, similar to what was being done in Shah Jahanabad almost 100 years later. It all started in Lahore. I won't say it started in Lahore, but it
Yeah.
was like a parallel kind of a city to Delhi or to Agra. And what you see here is there was also a Shalimar Bagh created in Lahore. I think they loved the name of Shalimar. There's a Shalimar Bagh colony in Delhi today. There's a Shalimar Bagh in Kashmir. There's a beautiful Shalimar Bagh in Lahore, and it was known for its symmetry, for its beautiful luxury materials, floral ornamentations, and a very, very refined craftsmanship. So, what you see actually in Lahore, and the way I look at it, you see a lot of architectural grandeur, which is very much part of Lahore. Even though the paintings there, which were created in the Lahore Darbar, were definitely more refined, more sophisticated, more cosmopolitan than in India. Because, as you know, in the time of Jahangir, Mughal paintings reached a different proportion altogether. They were known for their realism, they were known for their very, very fine brushstroke. And I think it was Jahangir who said, I can recognize an artist by the brushwork. So all this was happening in Lahore, but the paintings got dispersed. They went off to different parts of the world. They are probably in America, in England, in Dublin. They were taken to various places, but you couldn't take the
The
architectural
buildings,
heritage.
basically, yeah. Cool.
So you have a lot of architectural legacy in Lahore of the Mughals, where also you see a different kind of sophistication which happens there because they started using a lot of tiles, a lot of glazed pottery, a lot of blue pottery, enamel. And I think it was just a period when um, Jahangir and uh, was just developing his own very clear cut uh, aesthetics, and a lot of it remains in Lahore.
And how was it like different from the Lahore atelier is but different from Delhi and Agra's?
I think, as I said, they were far more refined and far more sophisticated. Maybe they had more, you know, more time because it was also about slowness. It was also about spirituality. It was not only about imperial power and luxury. There were a lot of things which go into the Mughal aesthetics. And in that, as we had also discussed earlier, they gave a lot of wealth and they gave a lot of importance to the handmade.
Yeah.
They really valued that. And I think this was one of the things which was very typical of the paintings created in the Lahore Darbar under Jahangir. There were, we see that there were Persian scholars, there were Central Asian craftspeople, there were Indian craftsmen, Indian artisans, Sufi traditions, traders, poets, and musicians which interacted constantly. And you will see that art never, even today, there's a deep interconnectedness. And you say that art really never grows in isolation or in verticals.
Yeah.
There's always an interconnectedness. So this very rich uh, soil of Lahore contributed a lot to the development of art and culture in Lahore because all these people were present. So whether it was the Nochkas, whether it was the Bais, whether it was the musicians, so it was also a very interesting meeting point of Central Asia and South Asia.
Yeah. And it also like probably, as you're talking about Notch girls and buys and tawayafs, which are like courtesans, not actually kind of not necessarily prostitutes, but people who are like there to entertain, and they also became a kind of culmination point for textile jewelry and the general aesthetics.
Well, I don't know if it is just the courtesans who would be the models for that. It had a lot to do with Noor Jahan as well, because Jahangir's wife, in my head, is the first princely or the courtly dress designer.
Whom we can see in her portraits and publicly she was visible. I mean, otherwise, so many of queens were not publicly visible that way.
Yeah, maybe it was also that, but also the fact that she was very interested in textiles. She created designs. She also, as I said earlier, that she was responsible. I think it was her mother who brought in the rose attar or itra
Yeah,
to the courts.
that's fragrance. Yeah,
Yeah. So they were very refined. And you were asking me also earlier, what was so special about the paintings of that style? I would say that they became more delicate in their shading and modeling. There was a translucency which came out in the layering. They were hyper detailed in their naturalism and intricate borders and floral ornaments and the blending of realism with poetic symbolism
wow.
started happening. So you see all these things in even the dresses, because when you see what was Noor Jahan creating, she was using the floral motifs which came from the paintings, from the borders, because the Mughal aesthetics was a lot about arabesques and floral motifs. And you see that in their block printing, you see that in their Zardozi, you see that in their Meenakari, you see that even in their Kundan jewelry.
Yeah.
So, what you see, it's very interesting is that for me, I see that the base is one, the mother base is one, and then it goes into, it's like a lotus, you
Yeah,
know.
one design language which is like you can see and kind of becomes in.
So it goes into their graphic language, it goes into the language of the embroiderers, it goes into the language of the weavers. You see a similar thing happening with their carpets. You see a similar thing happening with their beautiful, uh, cloths that they embroidered and the khillat which they gave to their nobles. So you see a similar kind of visual language happening. But what you see is the degrees, the application, the use of material changes.
And then there was also Multan, which became a kind of a important place for pottery.
Yeah.
And the blue pottery you're talking about.
I think Multan for them became really important because what it did was, for the first time, blue pottery got a life of its own. It became blue. We still have the tradition continuing, particularly in Rajasthan, with Shekhawat, who continued the blue pottery. But what was very interesting about this pottery was that it was not painted upon.
Mm.
It was glazed. And it was again very layered, very nuanced, very much about, detailed technical applications. It wasn't that you just painted on it. Numerous glazes were applied to it. So it's one of the most important surviving craft traditions from Pakistan, which we too in India are, continuing with. And what you see in the pottery from Multan is that it also carries with it the glazing traditions for centuries. They are floral, they are architectural designs, they have flourished a lot as part of a continuity between architecture, design, and embellishment. So you have three things. It's not just architecture, it is also moving into the beauty of the facades. And then it also brings a decorative element to the craft traditions. It comes to the everyday. So, what you see is that these tiles later on are used in Mughal mosques, in tombs, in palaces, in gardens, in vessels, in tiles, in bowls, panels, and also all decorative objects which have been created by the artisans. Because Multan, in art, I think it's a lot to do with trending, what we call trending today. So, something which catches your eye, something which catches your fancy, it becomes the trend. So, Multan's pottery somehow caught the fancy of the patron, I presume, which would be Jahangir at that point, and it got a overwhelming kind of popularity that it has, you see the blue tiles even in Iran and Isfahan, a lot of them. And what you see are the, uh, the, the similar kind of colors and similar kind of hues happened in the tile mosaics. It happened in manuscript illuminations when we had our illuminated manuscripts. It was in textile dyes. It was in the garden pavilions. You see it in architectural decoration. You see it in clay preparation. And what you see is that again, the language of these blue tiles is very much part of the language what you see in painting. The same kind of curling vines, the same kind of lotus forms, the same kind of stylized flowers, the same geometric grids, arabesques, and symmetrical patterns. They all are echoes of the Mughal aesthetics of that time. So, what I find really a parallel to what people are talking today. Oh, there is, interconnectedness or interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary, all the new catchwords which people are using. That is how it was in traditional arts. So, all the languages of art were very similar, but as I said, the materials differed. So sometimes you had the carpets, you had wool, you had silk, you had wood. Now here it is the tiles. But what is the visual language they are doing? It's similar. The same grid, the same arabesques. So what you see in this mapping is a similarity, and yet it is highly nuanced and layered. That is the beauty of Mughal art and architecture.
I mean, if you go back to again like 4 or 5, these centuries, and then look at how the manuscripts were made, because that's like, as a book lover, I think I keep obsessing about it. That what how were books made before the printing press came, and clearly Lahore was a big center for that. So how was that? I mean, and how did it work out? Because it was also very personalized, more of a every book was more of a collector's item that way.
I think bookmaking was also an absolute highest point of art. And I think, as you had said earlier, the fragility of paper, the way they wrote, it was also a deeply, like painting, it was a deeply meditative activity because the Mughal books in particular, calligraphy was also part of their sacred tradition. And to be a great calligrapher was to be a great artist. So the books were also like objects of art. And it depended on the paper they used, it depended on the pen they used, it depended on the ink they used. They also illuminated them with gold and silver. They also used a lot of indigo and the blue because blue was also a spiritual color. It was also a sacred color. It also denoted water. And for the Mughals, the blue also was in some ways reminiscent of their rivers of paradise. So you see, blue becomes very important for them. And I think that these books, or illuminated manuscripts as we call them, were again a labor of love, intimate, layered, nuanced, deeply meditative. And if you really look at the old books, they each page, each folio is like a painting. It's like a work of art.
And how was it like being organized? Because, as you were saying, there are multiple things in play. So there's some kind of a knowledge in play, which is put in the book as the text or the content of the book. And then they are imagining them as pictures, also using calligraphy, and then writing on the book, and then the whole binding and manuscript, that stuff.
So, it could be that there was only one person who was the bookmaker, could be. It could also be that there was an atelier where there were 2, 3 people working on a book. Somebody did the illustrated part of the book, like when you look at the Hindu books or the illustrated manuscripts, some of them there was a painter working on the illustrations, there was a person writing, and there was a separate book binder. But it could also be that a single person was making it, and that made him even more precious because this person was an artist par excellence. That they say that he knew, he obviously was educated enough. He knew the content. He knew the calligraphy. He knew the artistic um language, and he knew the art of book binding, because that also was a great art. You did everything yourself. So you see that particularly in the UK, some of the old kind of royalty take great pride in being bookmakers.
Yeah.
They spend their time making books right from the word go.
And these books are not like the reprints are not available. I mean, there are there like, so when the printing press came, did
The
they
whole thing changed. The
no
whole
no
thing
but
changed.
did they print those books the way they were? Because at some point of time the British came and the printing press came, and then these books were lying somewhere. And
I don't know much about that. I'll be very honest about that. But the books which were done individually are great treasures. For example, like the Pachanamas or Jahangir's own biography, autobiography that he wrote, the Tuzuke Jahangiri. They were all personalized books and were pieces of one of a kind.
well, we can see that we can read Baba Nama in various forms, but that's like just a text, but not
Yeah.
as the original book the way it was.
Original book, I don't think they were replicated at
Yeah,
that point.
yeah. Hmm. And one question is, of course, the way we talk about India, that how Mughal design, art, aesthetic, uh, how Pakistan has carried it away, like along now. And when we are talking about it in 2026, uh, how are they carrying it, the legacy of it, and how much of that is still living traditions or in terms of design and jewelry and
So I think that, Mughal aesthetics is a living aesthetics. It's a living heritage. How it's being carried on depends, I think, on the market. Even in India, that you will see sometimes you go to these smaller towns and people will say, a कारीगर will say, भैया हमारे तो बाप दादा मुगलों के लिए काम करते थे. A jewelry maker will talk to you about it. Because you can't deny the fact that Meenakari and Jarao jewelry was the invention of the Mughals. And where did these traditions come from? They came from the Mughals. Now, how they are surviving depends totally on the market. In India, we have a huge, robust market of jewelry in Jaipur, right?
Yeah.
The Jarau and the Meenakari is very much there. You see a lot of it existing also in the deep south, where you have the temple jewelry, which is very similar to the same kind of Prachin Kari. Embroideries are not available there. Zardozi is not available there in the way it is available in North India. But jewelry, you'll see that there Kundan and Meenakari is not as fine as the one you get in Jaipur and Gujarat. There they've been preserved very well. I think in Pakistan, the tradition has not been so well preserved as it is in India. And that is why, when times were not so difficult, people were coming. Anytime there was a wedding, they were coming to India to buy the jewelry and the clothes from here. Even though they have a great tradition of their barize and their wonderful cotton textiles, they always looked towards India because I think somehow the demand for the afterlife of beauty of the Mughals was more, I think, appreciated, and there was a market in India and people wanted that for their weddings and trousseaux. And that is how I think Mughal aesthetics lives in India, because designers, graphic artists, uh, weavers are still creating the same patterns, whether it is uh, the Banarsi brocades, the same patterns are still being created, and there is a robust market for it here. That is why the tradition carries on in India.
So one of the things which has happened in last these 500 years is about how cities have changed. I mean, how we have seen how Delhi has changed, how Agra has changed, and clearly Lahore would have changed in the same way, or maybe So in that, I mean, it's far more important to conserve the buildings, especially, and the architecture, which is more of a Mughal legacy. And so, what is happening in Pakistan about conserving their buildings and their architecture the way we see? We have seen Humayun's tomb happening here with Aga Khan's foundation initiative.
Well, I think we in South Asia, particularly in the subcontinent, are not very sensitive to city planning and urban planning. Look what we did to the walled city of Shahjahanabad. It is only in the last 15-20 years that we've become a little more sensitive, and it was redone and the roads were cobbled up again. But even now, if you look at the flow of traffic, when you go there, it's a complete mess. And what you see is that the way the Mughals had constructed it, they were very scientific, they always had the symmetry, they had the grid. And as you know, that Shah Jahan constructed Shah Jahanabad as a charbagh, as a Mughal garden, where he would sit at the top and look at the city. But it has his values or his vision has not been respected at all. First, by the British who came there, who completely, with disregard to what was there, created military barracks in the Red Fort. You look at what was, like there are areas in Delhi because where they are, they've just been kept. It's like Safdarjung tomb, it's like the Lodi Gardens, it's like the Jamali Kamali, it's like the Purana Kila. They have withstood the test of time because of their presence and where they are.
Yeah.
But it has not been done, or preservation has not looked into that in a sensitive way. The only place which I feel that uh, thought, reflection, and a great deal of care has gone is in the development of Humayun's tomb, which has been done by the Aga Khan Foundation, where the community and the people have also been taken into account. But otherwise, I don't think other places preserve any of this, because all what the Mughals did with their buildings, they built it through a lot of uh, thought, whether it was the Taj Mahal, the Lahore Fort, or the Badshahi Mosque in Lahore. These structures were important because they represent the most visible layer of Mughal civilization. And the Mughal courts were built not just by brick and mortar, but a lot of things came into it. They had manuscripts, they had gardens, they had ceramics, they had the pietra dura, they had the embellishments. There was so much that went into the building of a Mughal monument. There was music, there was food traditions, there was garden, there was calligraphy, there was weaving, and there were workshop practices within these monuments itself. And what you see is that if in these monuments the craft traditions disappear, with them disappears a whole ecosystem of knowledge. Because what does the craft bring to you? It brings you a whole ecosystem of knowledge of the intangible heritage of that particular craft. And what you see is that there is something which goes beyond just protecting the physical monument. Because you have to see, there was so much of intangible knowledge which went into it. How were the pigments prepared? Because a lot of colors which were used in these buildings were through pigments. How was the marble inlay cut? How did they mix their dyes? How were the gardens irrigated? How did the floral mediums or motifs translate through different mediums? It was in the embodied skill, in the hand, eye, and basically the collective memory of the craft communities. It wasn't a historical record. It wasn't that these craftspeople had the Shilpa Shastras to fall back on. They carried on the oral traditions which they had learnt from their ancestors, and they carried that on. So where is this intangible heritage respected? And therefore, the whole responsibility of even preserving these building traditions lies on future generations, which were not really carried out because many of the techniques have disappeared.
Yeah.
Because there was no importance giving to them. It's like in painting, you see the brush preparation, you see the pigment grinding, you see the burnishings, you see the manuscript techniques. Now, in building, what you have to see is you have to have understanding of stone, you have to have understanding of metal, of wood, of dyes, and of the tradition of calligraphy, because they used a lot of that, the whole system of pietra dura, what are the stones to be used, all these things, they've just disappeared.
Mm. So, one of the things is, of course, a bit about the scholarship and how this contemporary, relevance we see in Pakistan.
I won't even just say Pakistan, I say that even in India, because what you see is it depended a lot on local ecologies and material resources. Now, all these things are disappearing through industrialization, through environmental change, and the loss of artisanal communities. Why should, when these artisans don't find work, they're just going to
True.
leave it. So you see a lot of the way of making their mosaics, it's all disappearing today because where are the craftsmen? And again, the Aga Khan Trust has done a wonderful job. They've
Yeah,
found
both in Pakistan and India.
yeah.
One other thing probably I think Mughals have done in these 500 years is also like they brought the best of Central Asia and South Asia together and made a good match and mix out of that and created something very beautiful from there.
I think it was a very, very refined cosmopolitanism. It was a very interesting cross-cultural dialogue, uh, a very interesting cross-cultural initiatives because they were basically Indian craftspeople and Persian sensibilities, Persian aesthetics. When they joined together, they made a beautiful uh, web or evolved a new language which wasn't there, which is very, very typical to this region. It is not what you see happening on the other side of the river in Europe and other places, where also the Islamic rulers went. But in India, it was more about Central Asia and the local. And I think the way the Mughals came, as we had discussed earlier, they came here to stay. They did not try to impose. They created. They were very respectful. You have artists like Manohar, you have artists like Bichitr. All of them are Indian artists who are creating beautiful works for the Mughal patrons. And the rulers respected them and paid them handsomely. And they were not, most of them were not uh, Muslims. Most of them were Hindus. And they created the most beautiful Mughal miniatures at that time.
Clearly, I think that's important. After the royalties have gone, it's up to the people that what do they do with it, and clearly the economics, the people, the market, they start taking it and use those that heritage into their own living traditions, living use, which I think is that awareness is there in Pakistan as well as it is in India. We remain same but different. I mean, as they keep talking about it, and I think this is a probably again. I mean, this is going to remain for next 500 years. I mean, as it has, as we are talking about it in for the first 500 years of Mughals. We finished this season on 500 years of Mughals with this bonus episode on Mughal art, architecture, and aesthetic in Pakistan. But we continue with Art Indica on about other issues. We will talk about how art in India is also about uh, as a Vishwaguru of erotica and love to the world. So that will follow this. The next season will be about this. And thank you so much for being part of this immensely long 7 episode thing around 500 years of Mughals. And thank you, Dr. Pandey, on this. We look forward to our next seasons.